Cities by Charles Dickens, Book the Third, The Track of the Storm, Chapter 10, The Substance of the Shadow. I, Alexander Manette, unfortunate physician, native of Beauvais and afterwards resident of Paris, write this melancholy paper in my doleful cell in the Bastille during the last month of the year 1767. I write it at stolen intervals, under every difficulty. I designed to secrete it in the wall of the chimney, where I have slowly and laboriously made a place of concealment for it. Some pitying hand may find it there, when I and my sorrows are dust. These words are formed by the rusty iron point with which I write with difficulty, in scrapings of soot and charcoal from the chimney mixed with blood. In the last month of the 10th year of my captivity, hope has quite departed from my breast. I know from terrible warnings I have noted in myself that my reason will not long remain unimpaired, but I solemnly declare that I am at this time in the possession of my right mind, that my memory is exact and circumstantial, and that I write the truth as I shall answer for these my last recorded words, whether they ever be read by men or not, at the eternal judgment seat. One cloudy moonlight night, in the 3rd week of December, I think the 22nd of the month, in the year 1757, I was walking on a retired part of the quay by the Seine for the refreshment of the frosty air, at an hour's distance from my place of residence in the street of the School of Medicine, when a carriage came along behind me, driven very fast. As I stood to let that carriage pass, apprehensive that it might otherwise run me down, a head was put out at the window, and a voice called to the driver to stop. The carriage stopped as soon as the driver could rein in his horses, and the same voice called to me by my name. I answered. The carriage was then so far in advance of me that 2 gentlemen had time to open the door a light before I came up with it. I observed that they were both wrapped in cloaks, and appeared to conceal themselves. As they stood side by side near the carriage door, I also observed that they both looked of about my own age, or rather younger, and they were greatly alike in stature, manner, voice, and as far as I could see, face too. "You are Dr. Manette," said one. "I am." "Dr. Manette, formerly of Beauvais," said the other. "The young physician, originally an expert surgeon, who within the last year or 2 has made a rising reputation in Paris." "Gentlemen," I returned, "I am that Dr. Manette of whom you speak so graciously." "We have been to your residence," said the first, "and not being so fortunate as to find you there, being informed that you were probably walking in this direction, we followed you, in the hope of overtaking you. Will you please to enter the carriage?" The manner of both was imperious, and they both moved, as these words were spoken, so as to place me between them and the carriage door. They were armed. I was not. "Gentlemen," I said, "pardon me, but I usually inquire who does me the honor to seek my assistance, and what is the nature of the case to which I am summoned." The reply to this was made by him who had spoken second. "Doctor, your clients are people of condition. As to the nature of the case, our confidence in your skill assures us that you will ascertain it for yourself better than we can describe it. Enough. Will you please to enter the carriage?" I could do nothing but comply, and I entered it in silence. They both entered after me, the last springing in after putting up the steps. The carriage turned about and drove on at its former speed. I repeat this conversation exactly as it occurred. I have no doubt that it is, word for word, the same. I describe everything exactly as it took place, constraining my mind not to wander from the task. Where I make the broken marks that follow here, I leave off for the time and put my paper in its hiding place. The carriage left behind, passed the north barrier, and emerged upon the country road. At 2/3 a league from the barrier, I did not estimate the distance at that time, but afterwards, when I traversed it, it struck me that the main avenue struck out of the main avenue, and presently stopped at a solitary house. We all 3 alighted, and walked by a dark, soft footpath in a garden where a neglected fountain had overflowed to a door of the house. It was not opened immediately in answer to the ringing of the bell, and one of my two conductors struck the man who opened it with his heavy riding glove across the face. There was nothing in this action to attract my particular attention, for I had seen common people struck more commonly than dogs, but the other of the two, being angry likewise, struck the man in like manner with his arm, and look and bearing of the brothers were so exactly alike that I then perceived them to be twin brothers. From the time of our alighting at the outer gate, which we found locked, and which one of the brothers had opened to admit us and had relocked, I had heard cries proceeding from an upper chamber. I was conducted to this chamber straight, the cries growing louder as we ascended the stairs, and I found a patient in a high fever of the brain, lying on a bed. The patient was a woman of great beauty, and young, assuredly, not much past 20. Her hair was torn and ragged, and her arms were bound to her sides with sashes and handkerchiefs. I noticed that these bonds were all portions of a gentleman's dress. On one of them, which was fringed a scarf for a dress of ceremony, I saw the armorial bearing of a noble, and the letter E. I saw this within the first minute of my contemplation of the patient, for in her restless strivings she had turned over on her face, on the edge of the bed, had drawn the end of the scarf into her mouth, and was in danger of suffocation. My first act was to put out my hand to relieve her breathing, and in moving the scarf aside, the embroidery in the corner caught my sight. I turned her gently over, placed my hands upon her breasts to calm her and keep her down, and looked into her face. Her eyes were dilated and wild, and she constantly uttered piercing shrieks and repeated the words, "My husband, my father, and my brother," and then counted up to 12 and said, "Hush!" for an instant, and no more. She would pause to listen, and then the piercing shrieks would begin again, and she would repeat the cry, "My husband, my father, and my brother," and would count up to 12 and say, "Hush!" There was no variation in the order or the manner. There was no cessation, but the regular moment's pause in the utterance of these sounds. How long, I asked, has this lasted? To distinguish the brothers, I will call them the elder and the younger. By the elder, I mean him who exercised the most authority. It was the elder who replied, "Since about this hour last night." "She has a husband, a father, and a brother?" "A brother." "I do not address her brother?" He answered with great contempt, "No." "She has some recent association with the number 12? The younger brother impatiently rejoined, "With 12 o'clock? See, gentlemen," said I, still keeping my hands upon her breast, "how useless I am, as you have brought me. If I had known what I was coming to see, I could have provided. As it is, time must be lost. There are no medicines to be obtained in this lovely place." The elder brother looked at the younger, who said haughtily, "There is a case of medicines here," and brought it from a closet and put it on a table. I opened some of the bottles and smelt them, and put the stoppers to my lips. If I had wanted to use anything save narcotic medicines that were poisons in themselves, I would not have administered any of those. "Do you doubt them?" asked the younger brother. "You see, monsieur, I am going to use them," I replied, and said no more. I made the patient swallow with great difficulty, and after many efforts, the dose that I desired to give. As I intended to repeat it after a while, and as it was necessary to watch its influence, I then sat down by the side of the bed. There, with a timid and suppressed woman in attendance, wife of the man downstairs, who had retreated into a corner, the house was damp and decayed, indifferently furnished, evidently recently occupied and temporarily used. Some thick old hangings had been nailed up before the windows to deaden the sound of the shrieks. They continued to be uttered in their regular succession with the cry, "My husband, my father, and my brother," and the counting up to 12 and "Hush!" The frenzy was so violent that I had not unfastened the bandages restraining her arms, but I looked to them to see that they were not painful. The only spark of encouragement in the case was that my hand upon the sufferer's breast had this much soothing influence, that for minutes at a time it tranquilized the figure. It had no effect upon the cries. No pendulum could be more regular. For the reason that my hand had this effect, I assume I had sat by the side of the bed for half an hour with the two brothers looking on before the eldest said, "There is another patient." I was startled and asked, "Is it a pressing case?" "You had better see," he carelessly answered, and took up the light, and we'll pause there.